Okay, let me introduce today's speaker. Amsalu is a Marie Curie Fellow that started this year, last year, but let's say, is at the beginning, more or less, of his PhD. His Marie Curie program at the CMCC. He was previously a researcher at PEAK in Germany, and his Marie Curie is centered on the challenges for Ethiopia, represented by the decarbonization process. So, but with a wider perspective. So, not only focusing on the energy markets and energy policies, but all the interaction that exist and can be triggered with all other dimensions of sustainability, in particular the water dimension, the agricultural dimension. So all these intersectoral connections that are triggered by the effort of a country to become more climate friendly. It is particularly interesting to analyze the case of Ethiopia because it has unique social economic characteristics. It is a developing country. It is a country where large part of emissions come from the agriculture and the livestock sector, where there is difficult access to energy. At the same time, is one country with very ambitious, I should say, Amsalu can correct me, decarbonization or mitigation goals. Today, the topic of today's presentation is exactly focusing on the energy sector in Ethiopia and how the role it can play, especially when tackled by a climate or energy policies in achieving decarbonization, the implication for sustainable development goals, and some also ideas or insights on how to model or treat more operationally, quantitatively, all these very, very important questions. So, Amsalu, the floor is yours. I will give you a 5-minute warning when you have the last 5 minutes to speak, and then we shall open the floor to the question from our audience. So I don't see, to raise the question, please write them on the chat. I may ask if there are a lot, I will redirect them, to select them and redirect to Amsalu. Otherwise, we can also ask those who brought the question to then pose them directly to Amsalu. So, please, Amsalu.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
And the slides are visible?
Yes.
Thanks, Francesco, and for the nice introduction. Thanks for all of you who show up. Good afternoon to all of you from my home. And special thanks to Martina and Elena, which organized this seminar, so that I got the opportunity to kind of brainstorm my idea, what I'm going to work for the next 2 years here, and also get better introduction with many of colleagues here at Forestry or other parts of the CMCC divisions. So the topic is already introduced. I will the presentation is like organized into 5 main sections. The first is just to introduce Ethiopia as a country and why it's important also to study the energy sector in Ethiopia. And also this is followed by a brief presentation on the overview of the Ethiopian energy sector and how the energy transition or the shift or the transformation in the Ethiopian energy system would be very important for achieving many other development goals, including the SDG. And this then would be followed by what would be the implication of this current and projected economy, energy system for modeling. And last but not least, also I want to take this seminar as an opportunity to introduce, or I mean, just to throw some ideas to the seminar, so that we can explore also areas for future collaboration, either while I'm at CMC or after that. So Ethiopia is, for those of you who don't know, I mean, it's an East African country, and it's one of the second most populous country in Africa next to Nigeria. It has an estimated population of more than 110, and it's one of the least urbanized countries, we can say, with only 22% of the total population living in urban areas. As of 2019, the per capita GDP is estimated to be less than 1,000, so it's typical low-income country, and was, of course, one of the fastest growing economies for the last 10 years, where we have an average per annum growth rate estimated to be 8%. And it's a net importer country, where we have about net import to GDP ratio is about 70%. And Ethiopia is also an agrarian country, where we have the share of GDP, the share of agriculture in total GDP used to be more than 40% for many years, but now it has slowly started to decline to 33% as of 2020. But still, agriculture is a very important economic sector in terms of employment, as it accounts nearly 75% of total employment in the country, and it's also the source of the main merchandise export earnings. Before, I want you all to keep this in mind. Ethiopia is a low-income country with least urbanization, level of urbanization. That means the vast majority of the population, nearly 80%, living in urban areas, and a net importer, or with capital current account deficit, and also where agriculture plays the main role in employment and exports. So in light of why it's important to study the Ethiopian sector in general, first of all, it is currently at its low level of development. That means the per capita, or the total supply and consumption of energy in Ethiopia is very low, and it's least diversified in its consumption as well as in its production. It's dominated by a single source of energy and a single source of demand. Therefore, it's at its low level of development. That means it's also a new economic opportunity, then inviting many private sectors or direct foreign or local investors to it, and also at early stage of planning. So that it calls more scientific evidence to assist short and long-term planning for the sector. And it's also, the Ethiopian energy sector is also linked to the environment, because it's the main biomass is the main source of energy, as we'll be shortly discussing. It contributes to deforestation and greenhouse gas emissions from the forestry sector. It contributes to indoor air pollution affecting human health. And also, because agricultural wastes, typically mainly, manure and crop residues are also used in, especially by rural households, as a source of energy. And this would affect the soil nutrients, and which impedes on agricultural productivity. The Ethiopian energy sector is also highly linked with the macroeconomy, not simply because it's an input for industrialization and contributing to economic growth, but directly to trade balance, because the oil sector, petroleum oil, is totally imported. The country spends currently from 75 to 80% of the total export earning to importing oils. It's also a fiscal balance issue, because the power sector is public sector currently in Ethiopia. Therefore, about 17% of outstanding external public debt currently goes to the energy sector. Therefore, we can see that energy or energy sector development is generally key to achieve two aspirations, environmental and economic aspirations of the country. By economic aspiration, I do mean the country aims to achieve or to become a middle income country by 2025. I think we may fall short actually, but the country also needs to, or anticipates too much structural transformation in the next decade especially, and also aims to build a carbon neutral green economy by 2030. And for this, energy transformation, energy efficiency improvement is seen as key, one of the key pillars. And of course, energy sector is also, the implications of the energy sector in Ethiopia also go beyond the Ethiopian boundary, and it reaches to the neighboring countries, because partly the electricity is being exported already and is planned to export also to the neighboring countries, neighboring Eastern African countries. And so far, the country has started exporting to Kenya, Sudan, and Djibouti, and many other infrastructures under construction. But also because this electricity largely comes from transboundary rivers, it has also caused some issues, especially diplomatic issues on resource or water resource utilization and management. Therefore, it's important to study the Ethiopian energy sector. And here today, I'm going to give you a presentation on the overview of the energy sector, and overview studies are relevant still because it informs the current and future energy sector policies, and by extension, by the way, the total economic policies, other economic policies also, because some studies have found that even within the energy sector, sector plans or programs or policies can be said inconsistent or fragmented here and there. So by giving an overview of the sector, it may also help to put the existing policy documents even into a unified frame. And it could also help to explore possible synergies and trade-offs between the energy and other sector development goals. And most importantly, for my purpose, they would also help, or such overview studies also would help to inform the choice of energy modeling appropriate for the energy sector or for the country environmental and economic contexts. And I personally want this study, which is at early stage, to serve me as a background for my next works. Now I move to the overview of the sector. Excuse me, I don't know how is the norm if participants have questioned whether they are allowed to jump in, or the questions will come later.
No, the question will come later.
Okay, so I can carry on. So I will begin I'm now presenting you the overview of the sector. I will begin with presenting you the potentials, the resource potentials of the country. It's actually Ethiopia is endowed with various sources of energy, indigenous sources of energy, ranging from hydropower, solar, wind, geothermal, and woody biomass, and agricultural wastes, crop residues, and animal manures. And of course, fossil fuels also, or hydrocarbon reserves, which are not currently exploited at all, natural gas, coal, and oil shale. As you can see from the table, relatively it's only the biomass and agricultural wastes which can be said whose potential is relatively used compared to other sources of energy. I mean, the country has diverse sources of energy, including vast land suitability for growing biofuel feedstock. But nonetheless, the country has so far didn't exploit its energy potential. And as I've said, country depends entirely on imported fossil fuels. So coming to the energy supply mix, the historical and the present, you can see that there is almost slow change in the share. So far, biomass and agricultural wastes account about 87% of the total energy supply in the country. And the country also have one of the lowest per capita energy supply. It's about 0.4 tons of oil equivalent. For comparison, you can compare this 0.4 for Ethiopia in 2018, by the way, against Italy, which is 2.4, and world average 1.9. And another important feature to look at here is that the share of electricity is very low. It's barely 3%. And of this total electricity supply so far, more than 95%, or it hovers around 95% of the electricity comes from the hydropower sector. It has an implication for the energy security that I will discuss later. From the demand side, again, it's dominated by a single demand sector, the residential or the household sector, which accounts about 88% of the total energy demand in the country. And you remember in my first slide, I mentioned agriculture is always said at the backbone of the Ethiopian economy, but the energy consumption in agricultural sector is barely 0.5%. This is because the Ethiopian agricultural sector is currently virtually rain-fed, not less than 3% of the agricultural land is irrigated. And in terms of power, it depends on human manpower and animal power. And again, like the case for production, the per capita energy consumption is also very low. The data or information from the Energy Information Agency, the US Energy Information Agency, showed that the per capita energy consumption in Ethiopia in 2018 was about 2.8 million British thermal units. You can compare this against Italy, which is having 113 in 2018. But like in line with the current economic trajectories, the recent increase, we have seen also recent increase in the shares of industry and transport in the overall energy consumption. And we have also a handful studies, very few studies giving like what would look like the future of the Ethiopian energy supply and demand mix. And because I will not compare the studies because they use different sources or they use different time horizon and different methods. But overall, we can take from the available projections in terms of supply, still biomass will remain as the main source of energy, and hydropower will remain as the main source of electricity. And when we come to the demand side, also the current energy supply, energy demand mix is more or less expected to continue. That means the residential demand sector would be the main demand sector, and electricity will keep growing, of course, from 6 to 14.5 per annum, according to different sources. And the highest demand increase is expected from the industry and transport sector. This is much in line with the anticipated structural transformation and structural change in the country. So what are the current outstanding energy issues or issues pertaining to the energy sector? One can say energy poverty, energy efficiency, and energy security are the three important energy sector issues. Why the energy poverty, while we say energy poverty, we mainly refer to energy access to clean or modern energy sources. Only so far, about 44% of the households in the country have access to electricity, off-grid or on-grid or grid connections. And the country's energy supply is one of the lowest. Energy supply as well as energy consumption is one of the lowest in the country. And the very latest report by the World Energy Council puts Ethiopia 101 out of 108 countries in terms of its ability to provide sustainable energy. Therefore, energy poverty is one of the main challenges in the country and pertaining to the energy sector. The second is energy efficiency. This comes partly from the dominance of the biomass sector in the overall energy supply, and especially in the residential sector, and also because the electricity infrastructure is almost, because of poor design or obsolete technology used in the electricity infrastructure. Some estimates say, for example, about 26% of the electricity is lost in the transmission and distribution, and very limited number of households have access to efficient lighting bulbs, and also very limited number of households use improved cooking stoves, which have implications for efficiency of biomass energy. And the last one is energy security, which actually comes from partly depending on biomass which is unsustainable so far in many of the districts covered by one of the studies back in 2004. And electricity is highly obtained from, and mainly obtained from the, about 95% of the electricity comes from the hydropower. Does mean it's also susceptible to climate variability and change, and fossil fuels are entirely imported from abroad, so they're exposed to international oil price shocks. And the renewables like wind or solar or any other forms of renewable energy development, they are also highly impacted by the international price, because 70 to almost, for in some cases, 100% of the renewable energy technologies like wind turbines or generators, these generators and the likes are imported from abroad. Therefore, the renewable sector development itself is also affected by the international prices. Okay, now let's see how energy transition is important for achieving many of the SDGs in Ethiopia. Just having this overall background, let's discuss about energy transition. As many of you know, we don't have a single or such universally agreed single definition of energy transition, but more or less energy transition has to do with changing the energy system, maybe from a particular fuel source or technology or prime mover, that is a device that converts energy, or it can be, or some others also define energy transition as change in the overall energy system, like ranging from inputs to outputs, from suppliers to end users, or even sometimes the institutions or the regulations like managing the energy sector. But in developing countries, quite often, energy transition is associated with like moving up in the energy ladder, which means moving up from traditional or unclean energy sources to more reliable and modern energy sources. I will, in our context, I will more or less see the energy transition is defined, the energy transition definition will consist more or less these three definitions. That means energy transition may refer to would refer to increasing per capita energy supply, for example, but again, increasing the share of modern, especially electric fuel in the total energy supply. But also currently, we have this discourse also increasing the share of decentralized energy systems, like to have more off-grid options or solutions, off-grid and mini-grid options or solutions in the overall energy supply, because this will also attract the main actors in the energy sector, especially in the power sector, not only the government, which is currently in the Ethiopian case, also more private sector may involve in the energy sector. So if we define energy transition this way, how this would help to achieve SDGs in Ethiopia, I will just quickly go through them. And so far, I mean, of the 17, I can kind of link, or we can think of like direct linkage between the energy transition or energy and about 11 goals out of the 17 SDGs. I will begin with it's linked with the no poverty or SDG 1. Obviously, energy transition or increasing energy supply or moving more into more reliable and modern energy sources would increase income as well as livelihood options for many of the population in the country. It would also increase, first it would increase the productivity of available or existing enterprises, directly or indirectly. It would also expand new economic opportunities. For example, only 8.5% of the rural population is electrified. So as we increase access to electricity in rural areas, maybe new opportunities for non-farm and off-farm income options may be available. It will also, by expanding economic activities, it will also broaden the tax base for the government, which can be redistributed to poor growth programs. And also, it's especially in Ethiopian context, not only in Ethiopia, elsewhere in developing countries also, poverty reduction will largely depend on the progress is made in terms of agricultural productivity, or agriculture, the progress made in terms of raising agricultural income. And therefore, electrification, especially now in Ethiopia, would help also power the agricultural sector, which would help the farmers to retain the highest value share in the total agricultural value chain. This SDG 2, zero hunger or improve food security, is also another important contribution that can be made by energy transition. Number one, it would empower the energy transition or more availability of electricity. Simply, you can take that way. Could improve the irrigation practice, which could again increase the possibility to increase the crop harvest per season or per year. Or it could also help to diversify smallholder farmers, which produce about 90%, more than 90% of the total agricultural output in Ethiopia, by the way, could also benefit from the power availability to diversify into high-value crops like vegetables and fruits, and also it will, through availability of more power, they can also retain the larger portion of the value created through agricultural practices, because it could reduce, for example, the perishability of the vegetables or the fruits before they are supplied to the market. And it's also linked with, it will also help to improve the soil fertility, because it would also help the households to move away from using agricultural wastes for energy, which has, for example, some estimates show using animal manure for fuel may reduce agricultural GDP by about 7%. Or some others also estimate that like taking away or removing crop residues for the sake of producing energy, it would also cost 2% of the total agricultural, 2% of the crop production. Therefore, crop residues also makes about 30% of the total smallholder livestock feed. That means the energy, there is very much interesting interaction here between the soil, the energy, and the agricultural sector here, and then to SDG 2. And it's, of course, directly linked with improving health and well-being of households, because indoor air pollution is reported to be causing more than 50,000 premature deaths per annum, or to account about 5% of the total disease burdens in Ethiopia, for example. And of course, some studies also show acute respiratory infections of children under 5 was almost two times higher than the infection rate among the children, among the households using electricity or other improved as a modern source of fuel. It will also improve not only by reducing indoor air pollution, better electricity or better energy availability would also improve the health service quality, because WHO has a standard like to the health facilities, or the quality or the type, as well as the reliability of the energy would affect the health quality service. The health service quality, and for example, to do surgery or to also freeze some medicines, including vaccines, for example. And if we specifically look at health posts, which means the health structures in Ethiopia, which are meant to serve the vast rural population in Ethiopia, they have only 5% of these health posts. That means, remember, the health posts as to remember to serve about 80% of the total population. Of these health posts, only 5% will have access to reliable electricity. That means the health service quality in these health posts is not meeting the standard of the WHO. And of course, improved energy access also would help to improve nutrition through improving agricultural productivity. Fourth, it would be also linked with the quality of education. Number one, it improves definitely the education quality, service quality. Again, like as in the health sector, we have very limited number of primary schools. Less than a quarter of the total primary schools in Ethiopia are reported to have access to reliable electricity. So the laboratories, the libraries, all would be functioning or running if we have this better access to electricity. But not only this, It could also, the type of energy may also like affect the school attendance partly. Say, for example, if students are using kerosene lamps and other unclean sorts of lights, that may affect their health and then their attendance. Also, school children may be sometimes spend fetching or collecting firewood, then which again affected their study habit and study time. It's also energy transition in Ethiopia is also linked to energy equality, which is SDG5, partly to improve their health, the health and productivity of women, which are highly exposed to the indoor air pollution. It would also help the women to spend their time to more into their productive sector. For example, a study showed that traditional stoves, which are highly associated with the use of traditional biomass, spend on average about 58 minutes each day collecting or purchasing fuel wood compared to 60 minutes for those using clean fuel stoves in Ethiopia. There is also kind of, I mean, in general, the poverty rate is high among female-headed households in Ethiopia. That means it indirectly affects the willingness to pay or the ability to pay for clean energy sources in Ethiopia. Energy transition apparently would contribute to decent growth in economy, decent work and economic growth, partly directly improve the labor productivity. A study shows, for example, it may improve labor productivity of the manufacturing sector by 4%. And it could also improve help the available industries like to operate at full capacity. For example, some surveys of large and medium-scale manufacturing surveys of Ethiopia show about 24% of the manufacturing industries report shortage of electricity, also water, of course, as their first major problem, not to fully operate their production capacity. Therefore, it would also improve production capacity to fully utilize the available production capacity. And of course, very recently, electricity is also one of the export items, contributing 2.5% of the total merchandise export earnings per annum. So this would also contribute to the macroeconomic balance of payment, and also to economic growth. Energy transition in one or another way is also linked to industry, innovation, and infrastructure. That's SDG9, because the energy sector is currently at low level of development. That means as it grows, it's also a new industry opportunity. It's an industry by itself, we can say, from biofuel farmers to biofuel processing plants, from the distribution to installation of grid and mini-grid facilities, from production to distribution of biogas digesters, to the quite significant number of households in Ethiopia, and also exploration and development of hydrocarbon reserves itself is an investment as well as an industry opportunity in Ethiopia, which is now open to both foreign and domestic sectors. And it would also contribute to reduce inequality, either income inequality, because usually poor households depend on biomass. That means they would be like bearing the highest consequences due to indoor air pollution or low productivity due to lack of access to electricity or due to lack of access to better education or health services. So you can think of like there exists obviously energy poverty vicious cycle, and energy transition may help to break this cycle. And another important aspect that is not quite often mentioned is the regional inequality, because this, say for example, only 8.5% of rural households have access to electricity compared to 93% of households in urban areas. So this would represent a difference in economic opportunities, which could also trigger or exacerbate rural to urban migration, which would be, which is one of the development challenges. And it would also we have also like variation in different administration, energy supply or product supply or consumption mix is also different among different administrative units of the country, either level 1 or level 2. And this would affect also the labor and capital allocation among the regions, which have a long-term impact on regional inequalities. Therefore, energy transition directly or indirectly would contribute to this inequality, either income or regional inequality. And it's apparent that it contributes to societies and communities because it has both economic and environmental co-benefits. Focusing on environmental co-benefits, for example, the urban waste can be used to produce energy by itself and contributing to urban energy security, like there is already an example for energy facility in Ethiopia. It's important to discuss also its linkage with climate action, SDGs 13, because the country depends on biomass, mostly, remember that 87% of the total energy comes from biomass and agricultural waste, and the woody biomass or fuelwood consumption is the main source for forest degradation, which contributes about 46% of the emission from forestry sector. By the way, the forestry sector contributes about 37% of the total greenhouse gas emission in Ethiopia. But of this emission coming from the forestry sector, 46% can directly attribute to the fuelwood consumption. And also biogas digesters and improved cooking stoves could also contribute to energy efficiency in household use, especially by rural households. This would also contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. All of these policies are also expecting not only to contribute to development or the socio-economic progress, but also these investments are also with the expectation that there would be greenhouse gas emission reductions by investing in energy transition. I'm coming to the fossil fuels for the transport sector, especially. Again,
Amsalu, sorry, you should try to finish in 5 minutes.
Okay, sorry. So there are also policies like on the biodiesel and bioethanol blends making mandatory in transport sector, which also helps to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Last but not least, it is also linked with partnerships to achieve the goals, because it's related to one of the areas for climate finance, poverty alleviation support, loans and grants, investment in technology transfer, international trade, and as I have said, also regional and economic and environmental coverage. So the third point that I want to present here is what is the implication of the current and this current and projected energy system in Ethiopia for modeling. So we have to draw some lessons for modeling practice or modeling exercise. That's the most interesting, or that's most important thing that for me. Let's recap the key energy system features. One, it's low level of development. That means it requires huge investment. And the country is low income. That means there is also huge opportunity costs. Therefore, it may be good to think of like, and also remember it's linked with the SDGs. It may be good to think of like multi-sectoral approaches. And currently the power sector is public sector, and also as electricity is already, the energy sector is also already tradable sector, either from import or export. So it has implication for the current and fiscal balances of the country. So it may be important. The modeling approaches should also think of like linking the energy with the macroeconomy, and which I didn't present in detail today is also like there is huge variation in terms of resource potential, access, economic and population density. That means energy demand in present and future among different administrative units of the country, for example. Therefore, it may be also good to think of multi-regional approaches, all to account for these regional variations. And last but not least, biomass will continue as chief source of energy until 2015. That means environmental leakages of the energy sector to the environment, to the human health will continue. Therefore, linking the energy with the environment sector is also very important. These are the key things that should be taken in any modeling practice for Ethiopian energy sector. Unfortunately, so far, the energy or the literature of focusing on the energy sector in Ethiopia either focus on very specific fuel demand for the household using economic techniques, which are very important to provide detailed information on the demand aspect, but cannot capture the general policy and market interactions. Or we have also meso-level studies which focus on specific energy source, like fuel or biomass, biogas or solar solar and or wind sources, or hydropower, which is very important, and but they focus on the supply side, leaving out the demand. And the macro level studies, which I say by macro level studies, I do just refer those studies which are providing demand forecasters or projections using different techniques, either econometric measures or some scenario-based accounting models or optimization models, partial equilibrium models, I mean, but either they focus on the supply or the demand side, most of them. But this would be the starting point. So the starting stage for me for the main project. But these macro level studies, which are going to be my main reference, have limitation in terms of accounting the regional variations, and also to capture the feedback between the macroeconomy and the energy sector. Always the economic growth is seen as exogenous demand driver of the energy sector. Partly this comes because of lack of comprehensive or constant energy data for Ethiopia. Before, for the main, I want in general, like assess the economic and environmental implications of the energy transition or the shift in the energy system in Ethiopia. And particular focus will be given to synergies and threats of energy transition, especially with agriculture. And in due course, maybe I will be also contributing to the energy statistics in Ethiopia. For this reason, I will focus working on or try to capture the whole energy system and try to model its linkage with the macroeconomy. Also, therefore, I will I'm thinking of pursuing the economy-wide approach, and so far, regionalized dynamic CGD model would be one of the very best candidates to begin with. Last point, there are still opportunities. I collaborate with many of you here or other colleagues at CMC, which we're not able to attend today, through data sharing or through intermodal or inter-country comparisons with people working on exact similar topics, or even I am open for writing joint project proposals and on specific topics, mostly on energy, agriculture, climate change, and international trade, involving either partial or general equilibrium or economic growth models. And geographic focus would mainly remain Ethiopia, East Africa, or Sub-Saharan Africa. Last is I have to these are the institutions that are affiliated or that I acquired the funding. I'm so grateful for them. Thanks for your time. If you want to follow up the updates on the project, you can follow the Twitter handle for the project ETH_MEND. Francisco, sorry for taking a bit time in the.
No, that's fine. You're perfectly on time. That's fine. Yeah. So. You know, the role of the chair is reminding the time, but you did it perfectly. So we have 50 minutes for let's say 20. We can for open to questions. So if you have some question, you can try to write them on the chat. I'm having a look at them. Just to break the ice, one general point on my side that, and this is exactly on related to modeling and modeling what happens in developing countries, because I think that before going to all the things that you mentioned that are very relevant, for instance, the regional dimension, the economic system, and also the effect of policies, or a very detailed description of the energy sector. I mean, there are some general feature of developing countries, like for instance, the difference between, in particular of Ethiopia, so the large amount of rural population the huge diversification between rural and urban contexts, but also the role of the informal sector, and for instance, the huge importance of biomass that are very different from the standard, let's say, standard characteristics of more developed economic systems. So, for instance, I was wondering if some effort should be dedicated first to better capture this element in the modeling, the analytical work. I don't know, for instance, because you were also thinking to use or to how get some information from energy models like TIAM, how much those models are able to capture these peculiarities of the energy sector in Ethiopia. So what do you think about this?
Okay. Thanks for the very interesting questions. I mean, just even before thinking about the energy sector, I mean, it's quite important for us in any modeling practice to think about the overall structural features of the economy. So that's important point, and definitely the choice would be affected by the study purpose and the country at hand, or the context in the country at hand, and the focus would this would make that choice more biased to CG models, for example, which were made purposely to capture these features of the developing countries. And currently what I'm comparing is comparing CG models, single country CG models, which are made for developing countries like the accrue or the PEP or the stage. And I'm also talking with Ramon if the eco-mode versions are also tailored for a single country or have been applied before, if, for example. So that's the next step to inform myself by consulting the available literature. Definitely, the choice would be to focus, to think of a model which more or less will be preferred for developing country context. And speaking of the TIAM is times plus linked with the integrated assessment model. There is one study already that I cited or that I found. They just want to make an experiment with hydropower. They also link with a Bayesian level hydrological model, by the way. It's just about experimenting, but because the level of aggregation as of the times, the TIAM is not as much as I want, or because some of the energy technologies are not even available in Ethiopia, for example. So the TIAM may not be a possible candidate, but the times may be. As you know, I am in talk with some colleagues in Ethiopia, also here in Italy, in Turin, so that whether it's or how much energy, time, and resource would need, for example, to adopt the times to a specific country like Ethiopia, where we have also data availability and consistency problems. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I see a question by Ramon, and I think that Ramon, you can raise your question directly to Amsalu, so you can make the question.
Hi Amsalu, thanks for your great presentation. I just want to comment and ask you about what are you considering regarding the regional issues and border countries implications, because it's an excellent opportunity to study nexus water, energy, and food issues, and of course your main point is the energy transition. But in any case, it is important to explore also that maybe the energy transition is also important for the region as a, as a whole, no? In terms of opportunity cost of different uses of resources. So in this point, I want to know if you are thinking or maybe considering not only thinking in terms of Ethiopia, but also on your neighbors.
Very interesting point. I can just react, and I didn't thoroughly think about that, but I can say it's because very important issue. In terms of modeling, for example, we can take that as a constraint, for example, on overall availability of water. For example, if we think the region or the basin countries reach to, for example, resource allocation, water resource allocation mechanism, for example, we can always keep or put a cap on the maximum availability of hydropower, water for hydropower to be used in to be fed into the Ethiopian energy system, for example, or we can also think of in terms of exchange, like just Ethiopia produce and that exports to its own, say, if it exports from produces from the Nile Basin, it exports to Nile Basin countries or downstream countries like Egypt or Sudan, for example, where we have very serious issue currently. So that is also another option. If we are thinking this way, we may need even to expand and to use regional or global CG model like GTAP, where we zoom in more into the interaction between the Ethiopian and the downstream countries. And of course, it can be also seen as a risk of production, as a risk, an exogenous risk to production. For example, if agreements didn't come in time, and if they are going to affect the construction of different hydropower plants, for example, in 2030 or planned in 2015 or 2020, if they are going to affect commission of funds from international sources, for example, it would affect when the plants will start the production and also when they could start benefiting the economy. So there may be different ways to model this. Definitely I will look at to this, but not in terms of from the modeling point of view, but also from the wider discussion point of view. Thanks for raising it.
And I see that there are 3 questions for you by Baya. So Baya, you can ask your question directly to Amsalu. So if you're still.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm sorry. I have almost a lot of questions, but just I'm asking about the feasibility. But as far as I know, that the government of Ethiopia, they seek to have 100% renewable energy by 2030, which is after tomorrow. It's too soon. What's the feasibility of this strategy? And then there's a recent project, which is wind farm developed by Siemens. They just started to produce, I think, energy for 100,000 houses in Ethiopia. So I don't know, it's famous in Europe, but I don't know, it's the first production in Africa, which should be in Ethiopia. And then, do you think that water conflicts related to Nile River between Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt could impact the energy production in Ethiopia? Because you know that energy and water they are too related to. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for interesting questions again. And well, I will start from the last. Yes, definitely they would affect because. They are just bringing a political standoff, diplomatic strife, and it's very unfortunate that this had even grown to be a UN Security Council issue once upon a time. Yes, it may affect, as I said, like for example, it may affect the completion period of the dams, for example, and which means it would affect also the expected project returns. So far, I think it's because of the internal factors of limited economic capacity, which that the country was not able to finish the dam in its time. But now or more than ever, the pressure is coming from, as a country, the dam status holding water, the pressure comes from the Sudan and also Egypt. So I don't know how we will proceed. Yes, definitely it would affect. And the last, as I've said, there may be options, as I was talking to Ramon, there may be options to capture this as a risk to production in the sector, for example. And speaking of Siemens, it's very new contract. I myself went through the news, and I don't know whether there are some assessments already on the efficiency of the company, or even evaluation against the Siemens itself. Always, you know, multinational companies have their own also reputation as goodwillers, or also like downsides. I can't say more on it. And the feasibility of the Ethiopian strategy to be 100% renewable by 2030, as Francesco was also introducing, as I was also repeating, it could be said the Ethiopian energy sector plan is very ambitious, especially given the resource limitations in the country. I mean, financial resource limitation, I mean. But I don't know, or we are almost about 9 years, or the plan was made in 2011, 10 years ago. We are about 10 years to go, and I don't think we will be realizing this goal, partly because of, as you were also mentioned in your question number 3, this one of the renewable projects, the much anticipated renewable projects, the GERD dam is raising some diplomatic risks, and also availability of foreign finance or foreign currency is very important for the Ethiopian energy sector. As I have said, about 70 to 100% of the project, renewable energy project costs depend on imported technologies. And also the technologies are new to us. Solar, wind technologies are new to us, and we don't have the technical also manpower, which should have been produced beforehand. So still there are many issues. But in terms of resource potential, as I have presented in one of my slides, Ethiopia has a huge potential, not only to serve its own, but also to serve the Eastern African countries.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, bye.
So thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. I think that this is I think that is the research topic, and the country, the case study is very interesting, and it's important to address these issues. And I think that there is also good opportunities to collaborate at CMCCs, because I already tried to put you in contact, you plural, not you Amsalu, just there are many different persons that are addressing part of the research question you're also interested in. So with the methodologies, or with also their research initiative. BIA is one of them, for instance. So it's very good if we can start this joint cooperation and have these more frequent exchanges. And of course, I will be very interested and happy to follow the progress of the work. And so thank you everyone for joining, and see you to the next seminar, of course. So bye bye, and thank you again for the presentation.